Hi, this is Kelsey Cooper, and I'm the host for Disabled Birth Stories podcast. I hope those in the disabled community can enjoy these stories of bringing beautiful babies into the world and the journey along the way. I hope this podcast helps you feel seen, heard, empowered, and capable, no matter your journey to being a parent. I hope those who are able-bodied would listen to empathize with and support their disabled family member, friend, acquaintance, or random stranger. Thank you for listening, and feel free to email me if you have any questions or would like to be featured on the podcast at disabledbirthstories@gmail.com. Thanks for joining us today. After listening to this episode, please remember to rate and review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Please also check the description for our social media links and the link to our merch store. This podcast is for entertainment purposes only and is not intended as medical advice. Please consult your medical providers for all of your healthcare needs. Also, the views and opinions expressed by the guests are not necessarily the views and opinions of the host and vice versa. Hi, I'm Kelsey Cooper, and I'm here with Kristen, and she's going to tell us our stories today. Kristen, can you start by introducing yourself?
My name is Kristen Schell. I am a birth doula, a birth photographer, childbirth educator. I am also disabled. I was born deaf or badly deaf in both ears, and I got cochlear implants 7 years old in mid-20s for the second one. My main language is English, so I don't know sign language as much because I was not given access to that as a kiddo. But now I'm starting to learn it, so that's good. I have 2 kids, and they are both hearing, and I also have a hearing husband. And honestly, I didn't really care either way if my kids was born disabled or not, because at least they have one parent that understand either way.
Can you tell us about your first pregnancy journey and how that began? Kind of what you were kind of looking for and what expectations you had?
Yeah, the first one was a woozy. The first birth experience, I planned it at a birth center in Pittsburgh. It's kind of interesting because when I grew up, I was kind of scared of childbirth because I heard the stories from my mom. My mom had an unmedicated childbirth experience with all 3 of us, but she did not enjoy it. So I remember as a kid, I was asking if we can teleport the baby out of my belly or get a cesarean, let's just skip that whole experience. And then as I was pregnant, I decided that I wanted a more empowering birth experience, especially at the time I was able to photograph my niece's birth as a birth photographer, and I loved it. I love how beautiful it was, how empowering it was. I decided there gotta be more to birth than this cultural view that our culture has about birth. So I decided to take a childbirth class at a midwife center, and that was taught by doulas. I did not know what doulas were. I thought they were more for the hippies, but I didn't really understand their role until after I had my first child. Anyway, so my labor started spontaneously, and I was kind of expecting a quick birth because of my family history, but I learned that doesn't really mean anything. So I had spontaneous labor Sunday morning, and it was long, and then I started having more consistent contractions, more active labor contractions towards the evening. So I asked to go to the birth center. I went to the birth center and I called my birth photographer. She came, and I was 4 centimeters, but I think 6 hours later it was 10 centimeters, starting pushing. And the birth center was beautiful. My husband was there, and my younger sister was there, and she's also deaf. So I had a really great support person, partners that was there for the comfort measure, counter pressure, affirmation, whatever. And they had a beautiful bathtub there. It was a wonderful laboring experience. I felt empowered that aspect. And then when I was pushing in different positions, I was pushing for 2 hours, and usually in the hospital, at the birth center, their policy is if you push for 2 hours, they want you transferred to the hospital because they worry about maternal exhaustion. But I was no, I want to keep going. So I ended up pushing for 3 hours, but I was getting kind of tired. So they were okay, let's transfer you to the hospital. I think you need a little assistance because the baby was kind of having a hard time going under the pubic bone. So we transferred to the hospital, and I remember being annoyed that the ambulance EMT, because this is what's in Pittsburgh, so I was in ambulance trying to breathe through the contractions, and the EMT was asking me a bunch of questions, and I was dude, trying to breathe through this contraction while bumping into over potholes on a very metal banging bed, So it was interesting. But anyway, I got to the birth center. My midwife followed me there, and she advocated for me there. Then I got some rest, and the doctor saw what's going on, so she recommended Pitocin. But I had pretty intense back labor at that point. I didn't realize it until my second that it was all back labor because I never felt any contractions on my belly. So I asked for an epidural, then Pitocin. So we rested for a little bit, labor down. Then I pushed for an hour, and with the help of a vacuum, my son Ryan was born. He was on my chest, and he wasn't there for very long because they found out that he had a medical issue. So he was transferred to a different NICU children's hospital, and he required surgery when he was 3 years old. I personally, as a disabled person, don't believe in sharing children's disabilities without their consent, especially the sensitive medical nature. So I'm not going to say what kind of disability he had until he's old enough to consent. So, yeah. So that's kind of why I'm not saying what was fun. But
I'm totally fine with that, yes.
Yes. So then I got discharged from the hospital 6 hours after birth to go straight to the children's hospital. And he was there. Ryan was there for 10 days. Breastfeeding was a challenge, but after we got home, we got the hang of it with the lactation consultant help. Now he's 5. He's in kindergarten. He had 5 surgeries by the time he was 4. Yeah, so it's kind of interesting as a disabled person raising a disabled child and try to frame the disability not as a negative connotation, but just a neutral term, because there's nothing wrong with being disabled. There's some cool things that happen with being disabled. I talk about death perks all the time. I can go a whole thing about it. So with Ryan, I try to explain to him that sometimes our body needs a little extra help. Mommy uses cochlear implants so I can hear, and I wear glasses so I can see, and that's okay. So same thing with him. He has to take certain medicine to do certain things to help his body do things. Yeah. And then with my second child, that was 2.5 years later. He was in 2020, born in July 2020. And I remember COVID kind of shut down a lot of things in March 2020. And then it was April. And I asked my OB/GYN office, who also had a midwife practice, and did not have a birth center because I moved to a completely different state at this point, was Michigan. So I couldn't do a birth center birth. So I went to the midwife OB/GYN practice, and I asked, okay, I want to do all this time around. I know there's a lot of visitor restrictions because of COVID, so how can you guarantee that my doula can be there? And they're like, we don't know, but I think COVID's going to be over by then. And they're like, yeah, it's not. So, and then every time I went to a prenatal appointment, I would ask questions about accommodations for me, because we know that communication is so important in labor. And if I can't understand you, that's going to stress me out. If I stress me out, that's going to mess up with my labor flow state and how I'm feeling and coping and stuff. So I wanted to remove a communication barrier by asking them if they'd be willing to wear a clear mask. So they could still wear masks, but it's clear so you can see, so I can breathe their face and speech read the body language a little bit better. And then they were like, well, I don't know. I'm not sure what the policy is. It was just very vague. So I was like, okay. And then there was some other things that was going on. At one point at that time, there was stories about the New York hospital where if you tested positive for COVID, they were separating you from the baby. And I was kind of having anxiety about that because I was separated from my first kid for medical reasons, which is totally understandable. But it was still kind of traumatic because I was not expecting that. So I was kind of having a hard time with that.
You mentioned before we started recording that the hospital wasn't even willing to do the clear masks, and you mentioned that you weren't advocating for anything like transcription, or can you go over that a little more?
Yeah, I was kind of annoyed that the hospital and the providers were kind of hesitant with the clear mask because because with ADA, we have the right to ask for reasonable accommodations, and I didn't ask for an ASL interpreter because that's not my main language, and I didn't ask for a transcriber, so I was annoyed that I was asking for something so small as a clear mass. It did not cost them anything on their part because I was paying for it. So I kind of felt like, I don't know if you know the Michelangelo painting of the Sistine Chapel with like God and Adam, and like how Adam is just slouching on the back and he has his little finger, and then the God is outstretched to the arms all the way. And then all Adam had to do was lift one finger. That's what I felt like I was doing. I felt like I was doing all this effort to trying to, like, I had years of speech therapy, had Cochlear plans, which are not cheap, by the way. And I had to, like, order this special clear mask. They were not willing to lift a finger to meet me, where I was willing to go, and that really bothered me. So, but I also know I'm kind of used to that, because unfortunately lately, we had it. As a disabled person, we have to navigate in a society that is not inclusive to people that are not body able. So, able-bodied, sorry. Or neurotypical, I should say, yeah.
Once getting home, were there, I guess with your husband hearing and your other child hearing, were there any, like, thing that you had to do differently as far as parenting? Even with the first one, like, learning different ways of doing things, or like what were some accommodations you had to make from home?
So I used to joke around with my husband when we were dating before we got married. We knew we were going to marry and have kids someday, but I used to tell him that whoever hears the baby cry at night has to get up. And you're like, hey, that's not fair. So okay, for those who are not familiar with my Cochlear plans, I have to take it off at night so I can charge it because it's rechargeable batteries. And plus, I sleep better when I don't hear anything. Like, I have no idea how hearing people sleep with all the noises at night. I mean, I guess your brain will eventually filter out the sound, but I don't know, man. But the way my husband and I made it work was we tried, there's like a special alarm clock that you can get that will sense babies crying, and then it like has like a little device that you put it under your pillow, and it kind of like buzzes you awake. It vibrates a little bit, but we found that didn't really work because it was like super sensitive to like radio signals, and at the time we were living in an apartment building, so it kept coming off randomly. So it wasn't really working, so we're like, forget that. So what we did was, when my husband heard the baby stirring at the time for the first year of our children's life, we had them room in with us. So we had a crib or a bassinet in the room until they were 1 year old. So he would hear the baby stir around, and he would get up, change the baby's diaper, and then give the baby to me. And then I nursed the baby and put the baby back to bed. And that's how we made it work. And it worked well, because when the baby started like sleeping a lot longer, we were kind of like both celebrating because we were both up a little bit. Like, he would go back to bed while I was nursing and stuff. And I would look at him begrudgingly, but he was so helpful. Well, and then we got whatever the baby was napping during the days. We live in a small enough apartment with my first child, and our house is small right now that we can hear the baby. Anyways, I can hear the baby in the different room if they're like waking up. Or we also got a video monitor so I can look at the baby and see what they're doing and stuff. So that kind of like an accommodation.
Can you give some resources for other parents, or just for the birth, that you like prepared for pregnancy, or is there anything you did to prepare for pregnancy that you would advise others to do?
I think it's important, but I say this for everyone, but I think it's important to take a childbirth class, because you kind of have to know the birth process, and you have to know, okay, what kind of thing can we do to help me feel safe, loved, and secure and supported? And that might look different for everybody, depending on your disability. So I would be like trying to communicate, brainstorm with yourself or your partner or whatever on like what you would need to feel that way in the birth space, and talk to your provider ahead of time, because it's kind of hard to ask for accommodations while you're in labor. So just do all that work ahead of time if you can. And I know there's a fine line, because we kind of hire as disabled people to advocate for ourselves all the time. So if you're tired of it, then ask your partners to step up, or ask for or hire a doula to help advocate for you, so that all you have to do is just focus on birthing your baby instead of worrying about another thing, which is barriers. So that's what I would recommend. I also researched things that I knew would happen postpartum. Like, okay, we had a plan for if baby cried in the middle of the night, if my husband's around, but if he's not around, then what's the plan? I had a plan, okay, if he's not around, then I will sleep with my Cochlear plan. Or I had other deaf friends where they have a special one where they have like a little clip-on their shirt, and when the baby cries, they like buzzes them awake. And that works too during like nap time too. If I have to call a doctor appointment or something like that, usually it's not my favorite thing to do. So my husband does all of the doctor appointments, calls or whatever. But if I do, then it's not a big deal because I have an app on my phone that will caption the call, but I can still hear and talk to them. So that's how I get around that. It is kind of annoying because we purposely at my son's pediatrician office, and my first kid had a lot of different doctor's appointments. We purposely do not put my phone number in, so they call my husband. But somehow they always find my number and call me because they assume the husband is like, don't do anything. And it's like kind of annoying that that's like the assumption, the patriarchy, that the mother does all of that. And it's like, look, that's not how it works in our household. We are partners, and he does that stuff, and he honestly advocates better for my 5-year-old more. And it's smartly because, like I said, I'm tired of advocating for myself all the time, so I need a break. So he does that part. He's like, I got you. He takes over that. So obviously, so find a partner that sees you as an equal and just sees you as a person. So like, I love Dave. My husband's name is Dave. I loved him because he sees me as Kristen. He doesn't see me as like the deaf Kristen. Obviously, being deaf is being awesome, but just to see me as a person, and I love that.
Thank you for all this information and coming on to share your stories. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. Happy to help.
Thank you for listening, and feel free to email me if you have any questions or would like to be featured on the podcast at disabledbirthstories@gmail.com.